I've got this 2021 Tesla Model 3, and today I'm going to be talking about the automatic wipers. Not how to turn them off, but how to keep them off. Now, if you don't have a Tesla, you're probably thinking to yourself, are you serious? And if you have a Tesla, you're probably thinking, are you serious? And yes, unfortunately, I am serious. Tesla has made this frustratingly difficult to keep the automatic wipers off. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of this, why they do it, and see if we can come up with a couple ways to stop it from happening. Let's get into it. Now, the problem starts with cruise control. If you turn on the cruise control in a Tesla, you have to, at a minimum, use what they call traffic-aware cruise control. Now, traffic-aware cruise control, it's basically just a fancy way of saying that you set a max speed, and if you have a slower car in front of you, then the car will slow down to match their speed. Now, in order to see if there's a car in front of you, one of the systems that Tesla uses is this front-facing camera. But in order to see out of this camera, Tesla needs to make sure you have a clean windshield, and so it enables automatic wipers. Now, for the first 2 years that I owned the car, Tesla went so far as even disabling the off button on the wipers. So if you had the cruise control on, you couldn't turn the wipers off. You had to have them on auto at a minimum. Now, this wouldn't normally be a problem, except the automatic wipers on Tesla are kind of abysmal. So you could have a sunny day with blue skies, not a cloud in the sky, and sometimes you're driving around and the wipers just kick on. If you have any kind of bugs on the windshield, it might start smearing those. If you have dirt on the windshield, you might even scratch the windshield. Certainly wearing out your wipers by using wipers on a dry windshield. So I started gathering supplies last fall. I was going to figure out a way around this, but then Tesla quietly released an update that finally re-enabled the off button on the wipers. So now in 2024, you can turn the wipers off if you have cruise control on, but every time you turn cruise control on, it switches back to auto. So I've gone for a drive, I can see my wipers are off. If I turn on cruise control or auto steering, the wipers turn to automatic, which now means that I need to take my eyes off the road to turn them off, or otherwise they might come on during a sunny day with blue skies. Super annoying. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how the automatic wipers work. So this is a rain sensor that came out of a Tesla Model S. It's got a little sensor in here that shoots up a little beam of light. And if that light reflects off of a raindrop, it'll come back into the sensor and it can detect that there's rain and how much rain is on the windshield. Unfortunately, this rain sensor is not on the Model 3 or the Model Y. Instead, the Model 3 and the Model Y relies on using cameras to see if there is any rain on the windshield. Now, you might not know that the owner's manual forbids the use of hydrophobic coatings like Rain-X or Aquapel, wax, ceramic coating, anything that beads up water on the windshield. Now, I suspect that this is so that engineers have one consistent image to look for when they're doing rain detection. If they have to compensate for Rain-X or wax, all of these things are going to repel water a little bit differently. It's going to make their job at detecting rain a lot more difficult. Now, I'm a big fan of Rain-X. I want to use this whether Tesla tells me to or not because it allows me to see through the windshield a lot more clearly, and that's the most important thing to me when I'm driving. And frankly, I don't really want the wipers to come on hardly ever. The more I use the wipers, the more often I need to apply Rain-X. So I wanted to show you a couple ways to turn off the wipers and keep them off. So if I open up the hood, I can see this apron. I can just grab here, and this just pulls up. I've got this little panel here that I can pull up. There's a little electrical connector here that I can disconnect. And now there's a bunch of 10mm bolts that I'm going to take out. And now this entire frunk can just pop out. On the wipers here, there are these little plastic caps. These just pull off, and then I'm going to use a 15mm socket, and I'm just going to take the wiper blades right off. Now, each wiper blade has this little hose that goes down to this little plastic Y. This is for your wiper fluid. So I'm just going to pop up all of these clips so that these hoses are free. Now I'm just going to take off these wipers. And I'm going to walk off these wiper fluid hoses now. I'm going to remove some of the plastic trim here. And it's the same on the other side. And now we can remove this plastic trim piece all along the bottom of the windshield. There's a couple more tabs up here, right at the bottom of the corner of the windshield. I'm just going to take a screwdriver and kind of pop out these little clips because there's not that much rubber holding these things. I don't want it to rip. The second one I can just pop out here like this, and now this is free. And do the same on the other side. Now we can just finish taking the rest of this all the way out. And if we come up here, we can see our wiper motor, and we've got 3 bolts that we're going to remove, and the whole thing can come out. I'm going to remove the hood strut on this side. Now I can just get this down and out of the way. And that's going to make room so I can actually wiggle this entire wiper motor out and expose this electrical connector. I'm just going to lightly get a screwdriver in here just to break this connector free, and just kind of pop it off. And I'm going to take a piece of wood and just kind of set it in here so that the hood doesn't fall down on top of us while we're working. So now if we come in and look, we can see our wiper motor here has this D-style connector, and here is the original connector that would mate to it. And immediately it's obvious that we have 2 power wires and 1 data wire. Now I knew that I recognized this connector from somewhere, and this is a Bosch style motor on this wiper motor. Now Volkswagen also uses a lot of Bosch parts, and it hit me that this connector looked a lot like the O2 sensor wires on my old Volkswagen Jetta. So I ended up going to the junkyard. I found a couple connectors. One of them is the O2 sensor off of my old Jetta. That connector ended up having like a little key that I had to cut off, but then I found a connector on a coil pack of an old Audi that had the perfect connector. So what I ended up doing is just making up a quick little proof of concept here. I've just jumpered the 2 power wires together, but the signal wire I've connected to this little switch. So what I'm going to do is connect this harness in line between the car and the motor so that we can switch the data wire. Let's try it. So I'm in the car. I'm going to try to turn the wipers on. We can clearly see them moving. Now I'm going to come out here and I'm going to flip this switch. We're going to come back in the car. We're going to try to turn them on. Nothing's happening. The wipers are off. So now that we have a proof of concept, I can make up a dedicated harness here. We want to use some beefier wires than these sensor wires to run the motor. And then this switch wire here, we want to make way longer so we can run this switch right into the cabin. So let's make up one of these. You can see on this sensor, it looks like the power wires are on 3 and 4, and the data wire is on 1. So we will try to match that with our new connectors. So I ended up ordering a couple of connectors, both the male and female side. I've got my original proof of concept harness here, and I've got a roll of trailer wire. Now this is 4 conductor. We're going to use 2 of these conductors to make the power cable between the 2 connectors here, and we're going to use the other 2 to have a really long switch cable because we need 2 conductors for this switch. I also have this crimper. This is a pretty generic crimper, but this is a specialty crimper for this style of connectors. I'm going to show you how to put these together. So the first thing I'm going to do is just put a little split in between these 2. I'm going to pull off about a foot of wire here, and I'm just going to cut this off somewhere around here. I've managed to get one wire going here, so I've got some practice. I'm going to show you how to go ahead and strip this wire and get it into these connectors. So the first thing we want to do is take these little rubber stoppers. We're going to put them right over the wire, something like that. We're going to do that on both sides. And now we're going to strip it. So when you strip these, you really only need about 1/8 of an inch to get inside of this area here. I'm just going to go ahead and strip off about 1/8 of an inch, something like that, maybe 3/16, whatever that is. I'm going to stick it in something like this, and that looks about right. So now we can take our crimper, we can start our connector in here. So I'm going to start it in something like this, just like that. Now we can take our stripped wire, we can stick it in here like that. And now we can go ahead and crimp it down. Now we end up with our jacket as a stress relief right here, and our wire is crimped in right here. This is a very solid connection, and we've got our nice little waterproof boot that we can slide up like that. Now we can take our connector, and again, we want to match the original connector here. This is my thing, so power is on 3 and 4. So I'm going to take my 3 here, and I'm going to stick it in here until it clicks, something like that. And then I can just take a screwdriver and just kind of push this waterproofing all the way inside of there, something like that. And now we have a nice waterproof connector. I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm going to take the other style of connector and get it started in my crimper. I'm going to go ahead and crimp it down. Something like that. Again, slide my rubber boot up, and I can stick this in 3 again. So now you can see I've got 2 of my wires already set up. For my data wire, I'm going to leave these connected, and I'm just going to split this apart a little bit so that this can go between these 2 connectors like this, and it's going to be more of the same. I now have the start of my harness. If you want to double check, feel free to connect these to each other and make sure that yellow to yellow, green to green, and your signal wires are all correct. If you get these swapped, you can cause some damage to your car. So make sure this is correct. And for this last unused connector here, I'm just got a piece of wire here that I've glued into one of these boots. I'm just going to push this in here just for waterproofing. Something like that. Now that I've got my wiring harness made up, I can go ahead and connect this side to the car, and this other side is going to go into our wiper motor. Something like that. Now we can go ahead and put our wiper motor back in. We take our hood strut and put that back on. Now we can finally get rid of this piece of wood. And now I can go ahead and start organizing some of these wires. Now, this wire here is a disconnect for your high voltage battery. This is something that firemen need to be able to pull out of the car to disconnect this in an emergency. So do not attach to these or secure these in any way, but we can get these wires kind of situated because we have a little bit of slack here. We don't want these just rubbing around and making a racket under here or wearing through anything. So I'm just going to tie these somewhere down here. The bottom part of this emergency cable here is okay, but again, just be careful. Now we don't need the green and the yellow wires on here anymore, so I'm just going to peel these back. Give us some room to work with here. I've separated quite a bit of this brown and white wire, and so I'm comfortable now. I'm just going to cut it here. I'm going to discard the rest of this trailer wire. And now I have some of the spiral cable wrap that I'm going to just use to protect this data wire. I don't want it rubbing into any of these metal parts and causing an issue in the future, so this will just help protect it in here. I've now got my signal wire about halfway wrapped up with this protective sheath so that when I zip tie it in here, it won't vibrate and wear through our wire. Now, I've got a little bit of electrical tape here. I'm just going to put this on the end of this just to keep this sheath in place. And if you're curious, I'm using about 6 feet of sheath here and about 12 feet of signal wire. This is what I'm going to start with. Once I get inside, I can clip off any excess, but I'm starting with about 12 feet. Now I'm going to take some more zip ties and I'm just going to get this in place. There are a couple of plastic clips here. I'm just going to use these. Just go around those and zip tie this into place. So at this point I have my harness here all the way down along this frame, and then it ends up down here. Now your car might have one of these ducts. I've already removed mine, but I just put it back in to show you how it goes in. There's just these little studs that it pushes over, and it just pulls off and comes out just like that, and it exposes this area. Now down inside of here, if we open up this, there's this little blue plug here. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull this out, and that exposes a hole to our interior. So I'm just going to poke a small hole through this so we can get our wire through it. I pushed my wires through this little grommet, and now I can just kind of pull the rest of the wire through, and we're going to put this back in so we can get it into the cabin. So now we can just go ahead and push this wire in here. There's some insulation and stuff that's in the way, but just get it far enough so that we can grab it from inside. My goal is to reach in through here. So we're going to pull some of this paneling out of the way, and we're going to wire it up into this little panel here that's under the monitor. Now I'm not going to talk too long about how to do this, but I'm going to pop off this cover here, and I'm going to pull off this cover here so we can get access to that cable. Now if we look down inside of here and pull down this top corner here, we can see where our wire has poked through. So now I can go ahead and just pull out the rest of this and eat up all of that slack. So what I'm going to do is see if I can run a snake down from here to here, see if we can figure out a way to fish a wire up there. Now, the easiest way that I found to remove this plate is just with a paint lid remover. So what I'm going to do is just stick this into here, and then I can just pull down and it comes out. You can pull on this wire a little bit to give us some more room. And now we can see we have our interior temperature sensor. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull off this connector here. And now this is out. I just have this flat metal snake. What I'm going to try to do is push this through here and see if we can get it to pop out up there. And just like that, we have our snake. I now have a snake going up through there. It pops out here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a piece of string and I'm going to tape it to this so I can pull the string through. Once I have the string pulled through there, I can tape this wire to the string and pull the wire out so it pops up below that monitor. Go ahead and pull on the snake now. Kind of help feed it in there a little bit. We now have our string, so we can tie this to this wire. Now I can go ahead and pull my string. Get some wiggles. We now have a wire. All right. Now this is the original cover that was under the monitor. It just holds this little internal temperature sensor. So I ended up 3D printing my own, but instead of just holding the temperature sensor, it also has a switch on it. So what we're going to do is just connect this wire to the switch. Before we do that, I'm going to show you how I made this. So I've got this directly off the 3D printer, and you can see that it's very flat, but I printed out this little mold here. What I can do is set this in the mold. And now I just have a heat gun. What I'm going to do is heat this up until it sinks down into the mold. Now that it's in the mold, I can spray this with some water to try to cool it down so that it doesn't shrink. Now we can see there's actually a nice little curve to this. that matches the original part. So we don't need all of this slack anymore, but I'd like to leave a little bit. So I'm going to cut it right about here. And then I'm going to split them apart. Now I want to crimp on these little connectors. And so you can see I need to have about, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch or so. I'm going to go ahead and strip this here and here. And now I can go ahead and crimp on these connectors. Now I can push the rest of this slack back inside of here. I'm going to move my temperature sensor from this cover plate to the new one. We're going to reconnect our internal temperature sensor. And now we're going to connect our new switch. Now the orientation on these doesn't matter, it's just a switch. And now we can go ahead and pop this back in. We now have a hidden switch for our wipers. Now it's important under here that we route these wires in such a way that they're not going to be in the way of our cabin air filter cover if we ever need to change those. So you can see I've routed it up here, up above the cabin air filter door, and then around up through here. Now I'm going to go ahead and put these panels back on, and then I'm going to go under the hood and we're going to finish up tidying under there. Now we're going to go ahead and put our rubber grommet back in, but you want to make sure that we leave a little bit of a loop down in the bottom here so that if water does end up on this cable, it's going to drip off down here and not even challenge getting into this rubber boot. Now we can go ahead and put our wiper tray back in. And make sure that all of these clips are just snapped back in. And don't forget these little front corner ones. We can take our little push pin clips and put these back. We can take our wipers and reinstall those. And when you do this, make sure that your wipers are at the bottommost position, because this is how you adjust them. If they're too low, then it could actually break something. If they're too high, you're going to see them and they'll probably wipe too far. You want to make sure these are in the right spot. We can go ahead and put our nuts back on. We put our caps back on. And now we can reroute our wiper fluid hoses. We can then take our frunk liner and we can set this back in, making sure that all of our clips are lined up just right. And then we can go ahead and put our bolts back in. We'll reconnect this little wire here and snap this back in. With this back in, make sure that this wire is still available. You can tuck this kind of back in, and now we can put our apron back on. So now we can do a quick demo showing how this works. So if I go ahead and try to turn the wipers on, they clearly work just fine. But now if I come down here and I flip this switch to off, if I try to turn them on now, nothing happens. And this is exactly what we wanted. If the car tries to tell the wipers to turn on when we have it in cruise control, the car won't be able to communicate with the wiper motors. But there is a caveat to this approach. If I turn the switch back on, let's say I turn the wipers on, well now if I turn this switch off expecting to turn off the wipers, nothing happens. In fact, if I try to turn it off from the screen, they still don't turn off. This is because the car can't communicate with the wiper motors. If you want to turn off the wipers, we have to turn this switch back on so that the car can tell the wiper motor to turn off. So if you let anybody drive your car, make sure that they know that this switch is installed and how to use it. Now this isn't related to the automatic wipers, but I thought that the interior temperature sensor was kind of interesting because there's actually a little fan that's built into it that's sucking air through these tiny little holes on this cover to sample the interior air. Now I thought that the holes in this cover were pretty tiny, and I thought that would be a little bit restrictive in terms of sucking air through that to sample the air. And so when I 3D modeled my new cover, I made the holes a lot bigger, thinking that this might allow more air to reach their internal temperature sensor. Now I was curious if this would affect the consistency of the temperature of the air in the car, and so I have something here called a Raspberry Pi Pico. A Raspberry Pi Pico has a couple dozen inputs and outputs on it. Now an input is things like buttons and switches and sensors, and outputs would be things like speakers or motors or relays, maybe a display. And so today what I'm going to do is I'm only going to use the inputs, and I'm going to hook up a few digital temperature sensors. And I've written a little script that I was going to use in another video that's going to log the value of each of those temperature sensors every 10 seconds. So I've turned on the climate control in the car and I've let it sit for about half an hour, both with the original cover and with my 3D printed cover. And let's look at the results. So if we look at the results, we can see that in both cases, the back seat temperatures are significantly higher. I didn't have the rear fan on, so that's expected. But the front seat temperatures, they're both pretty consistent. They're about 70 degrees. I don't really see any difference between these two. And so I guess that means that these tiny little holes are sufficient, but I didn't know until I did the test. Now we know. So now that I've got this installed, it occurred to me that I have a data wire going directly to our wiper motor. I also have our sensor from the Model S and a Raspberry Pi Pico. And so I thought that maybe I could figure out a way to install this rain sensor in the Model 3. So I ended up searching for a bit. I went down this rabbit hole with LIN bus and CAN bus and all the various communication systems inside the car. And that led me to a company called Enhance Auto. Now, Enhance Auto is years ahead of me in terms of research and development, trying to figure out how to tap into Tesla's communication system. And so I reached out to them and they hooked me up with their flagship product called the Commander. Now this thing, you install this in the car and it's listening for commands that are being sent by the car, and then it can actually inject its own commands. Now there's one feature that this offers that I'm excited about that pertains to our automatic wipers. So I'm going to install this quick and then I'll show you what that is. So I've already taken apart the inside of my passenger door, and you can see there's an available connector right here. On my year car, this is where I'm supposed to connect my Commander. I guess on other cars, there is a spot behind the center console. So I can just take this, I'm just going to plug this in here. And now I can pop out this connector here. And I can take this one, plug it in here, and then I can connect this in here. I now have this wire available to plug into my Commander. So this just plugs into here like this. And now we can just tuck all this back in. Now I'm going to zip tie this in place so it doesn't rattle around, but I'm going to leave it up here so I have easy access to take this out should I ever want to. Now we can put everything back together. And this is how it should look when you're all done. Everything is all nice and neat, and you can't even tell we were in there. So I've got the Commander installed. I'm going for another drive. You can see if I turn on cruise control, the wipers switch to automatic. So now I've pulled over. I'm going to go into the Commander menu here. I'm going to say the auto off menu. And there's a little setting here that says keep wipers off. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle that. It's giving me a little bit of a warning. I'm going to say okay. And now we're going to go for another drive. All right, so I'm going for another drive. I'm going to try to turn on cruise control. And the wipers remained off. What about auto steering? The wipers are still off. This thing's working. And of course, if I want to turn the wipers on, I absolutely can. There's nothing that interferes with that. Now the Commander lets you do way more than just keep the automatic wipers off. You can even pair these little wireless buttons to it to do any of its features, like opening the glove box or folding and unfolding the mirrors with the click of a button. But it also enables some features that should give you pause, because you can do things like enabling off-road mode in a Model 3, and you can do things like burnouts and donuts. And these are things that Tesla excluded from the car for a reason. And it might just be a cash grab. They want to save some of these features for their higher end models, but maybe there actually is a reason that Tesla doesn't let you do these things in a Model 3. And also, you are installing third-party hardware that's listening for commands and injecting its own commands on a system that might not be expecting them. And having written a lot of software in my life, I think it's pretty reasonable that there could be an engineer out there who said, the car can't get into this mode because there's no way for it to get into this mode. And now there is. And so at the end of the day, I just thought it was wise to consider some level of caution before installing something like this. So we now have two solutions to keep our automatic wipers off. The switch that we installed is completely future-proof. There's no software update that Tesla could release that would turn the wipers on with that installed. The commander, I think Tesla probably could detect and disable if they wanted to, but I don't know that they have a reason to do that. And so it's probably not something that you really need to consider too much. If you're interested in installing one of the solutions that I presented here, then I will put links in the description to everything that you need, from the tools or the parts that I use to make up the wiring harness, the model for the 3D printed cover. I'll even put links to the 3D printers that I recommend, and of course to Enhance Auto's Commander. It's a shame that Tesla made this so complicated. This is something they could easily solve with software, but until then, I hope you found this helpful.